January 17, 1945. The dense Ardennes forest lay shrouded in a low, creeping fog. Snow clung to branches, muffling the footsteps of men moving in disciplined silence. A small American platoon, barely 30 men, crouched among the skeletal trees, their breath visible in the icy air. Each soldier gripped an M1 Garand, the metal cold but precise in their hands. From the mist, the sharp crack of rifle fire rang out. German troops, advancing cautiously along the narrow forest track, froze. Volley after volley erupted from concealed American positions. Every shot seemed to come from multiple directions at once, echoing through the trees. To the Germans, it was as if a full company had emerged from the shadows surrounding them. Confusion spread quickly among their ranks. Officers shouted orders that went unheard. Men huddled behind trees and snowbanks, hearts hammering, certain they were outnumbered. The Americans, calm and coordinated, kept firing, each report deliberate, each movement controlled. A single platoon, yet the Germans believed they faced an army. In the fog, fear and fire converged. History was about to bend in favor of a weapon and the hands that wielded it. By 1940, Europe was already engulfed in war. Germany's blitzkrieg had swept through Poland, then France, leaving the Allied forces scrambling to adapt. The United States remained officially neutral, yet military planners watched every engagement closely, studying tactics, logistics, and weapons technology. Across the Atlantic, American industry began a quiet, monumental transformation, preparing not only for mass production but for a fundamentally different type of infantry warfare. The backbone of any army is its rifle. For decades, U.S. forces had relied on the bolt-action Springfield M1903, a reliable but slow weapon. One trained soldier could fire maybe 15 aimed rounds per minute. In the early skirmishes of World War II, such a rate left infantry at a tactical disadvantage, especially against rapid, mobile German squads armed with semi-automatic weapons like the Guha 43. The Americans knew they needed something faster, more powerful, and capable of changing the tempo of battle. Enter the M1 Garand, developed under John C. Garand in the 1930s. It was the first semi-automatic rifle to be issued as standard to U.S. infantry, so soldiers no longer had to manually cycle the bolt after each shot. The Garand's 8-round end-block clip could be fired in rapid succession, each shot precise, each discharge resonating with a mechanical confidence unknown to most of its adversaries. By 1942 it was being issued to frontline units. The rifle itself was more than metal and wood. It was a psychological instrument. Unlike bolt-action rifles, the Garand allowed a single soldier to deliver sustained, accurate fire without pause. Platoon leaders quickly realized its potential. A squad of 8 men, each armed with a Garand, could produce the volume of fire that previously required 30. In the dense forests and rolling fields of Europe, this multiplication of effect transformed the way American infantry could engage an enemy. Training became crucial. American soldiers were drilled in fire, discipline, movement, and camouflage. Unlike German units, which emphasized rapid, aggressive maneuvers relying on coordination across company or battalion levels, U.S. troops were taught to exploit the rifle's semi-automatic advantage. A platoon could establish a defensive position along a narrow pass, a forest track, or a ridge, and with careful timing, create the illusion of a far larger force. Rifle reports echoed, pauses were measured, and the terrain became a weapon itself. Meanwhile, German infantry doctrine remained methodical. Companies advanced in formations designed to maximize mutual support and coordinated fire. They relied on reconnaissance and careful engagement to avoid ambushes. When confronted with a new type of sustained fire from seemingly impossible positions, confusion often sets in. Reports from the early stages of the Ardennes and other contested regions describe German soldiers hesitating, misjudging the size of American forces, and retreating under pressure from what they assumed were numerically superior units. By the winter of 1944, U.S. infantry had refined these tactics. Platoons moved with quiet precision, riflemen firing in controlled bursts, exploiting terrain and weather. The Garands pinging the distinctive sound when the end-block clip ejected became a familiar signal to both friend and foe. For the Germans, that sound was often the last thing they heard before realizing they were under sustained, coordinated fire from positions that seemed impossible to hold for a single platoon. The rifle's impact extended beyond small-scale skirmishes. Commanders noticed that German units became more cautious, hesitant to advance through forests, towns, or narrow valleys without thorough reconnaissance. Reports emphasized that even minor American positions could delay or disrupt entire companies. A platoon in a well-chosen spot, armed with Garands, could dictate the tempo of engagement, forcing larger enemy units to react rather than act. But the story of the Garand was not just mechanical or tactical, it intertwined with a human element. Soldiers learning to trust their weapon, to coordinate silently, and to exploit the enemy's perceptions. Each platoon that mastered the rifle's rhythm gained an almost intangible advantage: confidence. And confidence, in battle, can ripple outward, influencing morale, decision-making, and ultimately survival. These early encounters, often overlooked in broader histories, set the stage for moments where a handful of Americans could appear to be an entire company. It was not magic. It was engineering, training, and the precise application of firepower in the right environment. Yet the psychological effect on the enemy's fear, hesitation, overestimation was profound, shaping engagements before a single bayonet clashed or grenade exploded. In the Ardennes, in the forests of Belgium and Luxembourg, and in smaller skirmishes across Europe, the groundwork was laid. The American rifle was no longer just a tool. It had become a force multiplier, capable of turning a platoon into an apparition of overwhelming strength. And soon, the Germans would confront it, not as theory, but in the icy fog of real combat. Across the front lines, German commanders believed their doctrine was near perfect. Their units moved in company-sized formations, relying on combined arms, riflemen, machine guns, mortar, and occasional armored support. Reconnaissance patrols scouted ahead, maps guided advances, and field intelligence briefed officers on enemy strength. Yet all these advantages could be undone by a small, disciplined American platoon armed with a semi-automatic rifle. Reports from late 1944 illustrate the pattern. In the dense forests of Belgium, German reconnaissance often spotted only fragments of American units. But when engagement began, the volume of sustained fire suggested a force several times larger. Soldiers would duck behind trees, thinking themselves surrounded, while platoon leaders calmly directed volleys from multiple positions. These were not massed units, they were small teams executing well-practiced firing drills. The Germans, accustomed to facing bolt-action rifles, underestimated the sheer rate of fire. A bolt-action infantryman firing 15 rounds per minute might suppress a small enemy squad, but 8 men with Garands could fire nearly 60 aimed shots in the same span, each with lethal accuracy. From afar, the crackling of rifle fire echoed through the forest like a symphony of machine guns. German soldiers, hearing multiple directions of fire, assumed flanking maneuvers were in place, that hidden companies awaited an ambush. This misjudgment was compounded by terrain. Forests, hedgerows, and snow-covered ridges fragmented the battlefield. Visibility was poor, movements were obscured, and sounds carried unpredictably. For American platoons, these natural barriers became extensions of their strategy. A single position on high ground, firing in measured bursts, could dominate a valley. Below, patrols moving through narrow paths could pin entire German squads, forcing officers to deploy reserves prematurely. In essence, geography amplified technology and training. Small skirmishes revealed how the Germans adapted slowly. Initial encounters left officers frustrated and soldiers unnerved. Debrief reports from January 1945 describe units halting advances, awaiting reinforcements that sometimes never arrived. One officer noted that the enemy fired from every direction at once. It was impossible to determine their number or position. These were platoons, numbering no more than 30 men, yet they projected the presence of a full company. Fear, confusion, and the chaos of misperception became weapons in themselves. Meanwhile, American leadership encouraged this exploitation. Platoon commanders like those in the 2nd and 3rd Infantry Divisions emphasized coordinated fire, alternating volleys, and using the rifle's semi-automatic capability to control engagements. Unlike larger units, which often relied on massed artillery or armor, these platoons relied on discipline, timing, and psychological pressure. Every M1 Garand report became both a physical threat and a signal. The Americans were in control. Technology, training, and terrain converged. The Germans had not faced a weapon that allowed a small number of soldiers to produce so much fire in such a compact footprint. Even elite units, including the Waffen-SS, fell prey to reports from patrols in the Ardennes highlight moments where squads believed they were surrounded by battalions, only to discover after retreating that they had been engaged by a handful of riflemen. The strategic implications were profound. When commanders overestimated enemy strength, they hesitated, altered plans, or overcommitted resources unnecessarily. Entire advances were slowed, supply lines were delayed, and the American platoons, though small, dictated the tempo. In many cases, this effect turned a minor defensive action into a delaying maneuver of operational significance. A platoon with Garands could delay a company for hours, shaping the broader battle without requiring reinforcements. By the winter of 1945, these lessons were firmly established. American infantry units understood that their semi-automatic rifles, when wielded with discipline, could achieve effects that were disproportionate to numbers alone. Platoons could cover larger areas, fix enemy units in place, and create illusions of overwhelming strength. German forces, trained to respect numbers and formation, were particularly susceptible to this tactical deception. This context, weapon innovation, disciplined training, terrain exploitation, and enemy misperception set the stage for the cinematic engagements that would follow. Platoons armed with M1 Garands became more than just small units. They became instruments of psychological warfare, and in the forests and villages of Europe, they would soon demonstrate just how devastating a single platoon could appear when the enemy believed it faced a company. The effectiveness of the M1 Garand was never just in the metal or the clip. It was in the hands that wielded it. American infantrymen, many barely out of training camps, were tasked with operating a weapon that demanded discipline and composure under fire. A single rifleman, firing rapidly from cover, could hold a path or forest edge against forces far larger than his platoon, but doing so required nerves of steel. Soldiers described the strange rhythm of combat with the Garand. Each shot was deliberate, each breath measured. They learned to fire in controlled bursts, alternating between positions, to maintain continuous pressure. Platoon members communicated silently, hand signals replacing verbal commands whenever possible. In letters home, many wrote of the eerie calm that the rifle allowed while Germans panicked. Americans could methodically control engagements. The human factor extended beyond skill. Fear and adrenaline were constant companions. Yet, knowing that, their rifle could project the strength of a company imbued soldiers with confidence, they understood that a well-placed volley could disrupt, intimidate, and manipulate the enemy's perception. Small acts of courage holding a forward position, covering a retreat, or suppressing an advance could ripple into strategic outcomes. For a platoon leader, each rifleman was a multiplier. For the soldiers themselves, the Garand turned anxiety into purpose. From a tactical perspective, the M1 Garand allowed platoons to redefine the battlefield. Where previously a defensive line required dozens of men to deliver suppressive fire, 8 to 12 Garand armed soldiers could dominate the same sector. In forests, towns, or snow-covered ridges, this multiplication of effect became decisive. Platoon leaders quickly learned to exploit terrain. Narrow forest paths, abandoned farmhouses, and ridge crests became force multipliers. Soldiers could fire from multiple positions, creating crossfires that made a platoon seem omnipresent. Pause intervals, alternating bursts, and the echoing acoustics of the forest all contributed to an illusion of larger numbers. German doctrine, built around company formations and measured advances, often broke under such conditions. Reports indicated that units encountering American platoons would hesitate, overestimate enemy strength, and sometimes retreat entirely. This was tactical deception by default, with no extra truths, no trickery, only coordinated fire and terrain mastery. Platoons could stall enemy companies, secure key choke points, or delay advances without reinforcements. The M1 Garand turned ordinary infantry squads into tactical architects of battlefield control. At the heart of this transformation was technology. The M1 Garand was revolutionary in several ways. Its semi-automatic mechanism allowed soldiers to maintain sustained, accurate fire far beyond bolt-action competitors. Each 8-round en-bloc clip could be fired in quick succession, producing a continuous volume of fire previously unattainable at the platoon level. accuracy at medium ranges. Up to 500 meters gave American troops confidence to engage effectively without needing massed formations. The rifle's weight and balance made aiming and firing efficient, while the distinctive ping of the clip ejection became both a signal and a morale booster. Soldiers learned to incorporate this rhythm into combat drills, firing in volleys that maintained pressure while minimizing exposure. The technological advantage was not limited to the rate of fire. The Garand's reliability in harsh conditions, mud, snow, and freezing temperatures, was a critical factor. Other semi-automatic rifles of the era were prone to jamming. The Garand's design minimized failures. A platoon operating in the winter, for instance, could maintain continuous fire even when frost-coated terrain hampered other weapons. This reliability turned semi-automatic capability into tactical inevitability. For the Germans, this was bewildering. Encounters with small groups delivering rapid, coordinated fire revealed a disparity in both perception and reality. The Garand allowed a platoon to project the destructive power and presence of a company, changing calculations, slowing advances, and creating openings for American operational success. These three angles, the human, the tactical, and the technological, illustrate how a weapon's impact extends far beyond its metal and mechanics. Soldiers became extensions of the rifle, platoons became architects of illusion, and the Garand itself became a symbol of American adaptability and innovation. The story is far from complete. To fully understand this phenomenon, we must examine the enemy's perspective, leadership decisions, and the psychological consequences on both sides. For the German infantry, encounters with American platoons armed with M1 Garands were often bewildering. Trained to respect formation, numbers, and fire discipline, they relied on visual confirmation of enemy strength before committing to attack. Yet in forests, hedgerows, and snow-covered ridges, the rapid, precise fire of a single American platoon created illusions of overwhelming force. Soldiers would hear bursts of rifle fire seemingly coming from all directions. Shadows between trees suggested multiple enemy positions. Occasional gunfire from an unseen flank reinforced the idea of encirclement. Even officers struggled to assess the situation. Reports from late 1944 and early 1945 describe entire squads hesitating to advance, believing they faced not a platoon but an entire company. These misperceptions disrupted German tactical planning, slowed advances, and sometimes caused units to retreat entirely from positions they could have held. The psychological shock was magnified by sound and terrain. The forest muffled movement, yet carried gunfire with strange echoes. The distinctive ping of the Garand clip ejection became a signal of persistent, lethal presence. German troops had no experience confronting a small, highly coordinated unit, capable of producing sustained fire at this tempo. The M1 Garand was not only a rifle, it was an instrument of confusion, shaping the battlefield before soldiers ever engaged in hand-to-hand combat. Leadership, on both sides, played a pivotal role in the Garand's battlefield impact. American platoon leaders, often lieutenants with minimal combat experience, were entrusted with autonomy. They learned to synchronize fire, position soldiers to maximize coverage, and exploit terrain to amplify perceived numbers. Orders were concise, nonverbal signals common, and fire discipline strict. German officers faced a different challenge. Encounters with small American platoons caused hesitation in units trained for coordinated company-level maneuvers. Commanders were forced to make rapid decisions with incomplete information. Sometimes they overcommitted forces unnecessarily. Other times, they delayed attacks entirely. Tactical miscalculations became frequent, and the initiative shifted to the Americans. Even when outnumbered, leadership decisions under fire highlighted the importance of training, doctrine, and perception. The Americans demonstrated that discipline, paired with technological advantage, could achieve results comparable to larger units. Conversely, rigid adherence to traditional formation-based doctrine placed German commanders at a disadvantage, illustrating how innovation and adaptability could alter the course of engagements. Beyond numbers and tactics, the Garand shaped morale on both sides. For American soldiers, the rifle provided confidence. Each well-timed volley, each position held against advancing Germans, reinforced belief in their capabilities. Fear of being outgunned or outnumbered was mitigated by the rifle's semi-power, enabling small units to punch far above their weight. For German troops, the psychological impact was profound. Misjudging enemy strength created doubt and hesitation. Soldiers reported feeling surrounded when only a handful of Americans were present. Panic spread quickly in units unprepared for rapid, precise fire. This encounter would become emblematic of the M1 Garand's battlefield impact. The rifle's combination of rate of fire, a coverwhelm and strength. But more than technology, it was the disciplined execution of tactics, the use of terrain, and the psychological manipulation of enemy perception that achieved victory. The Germans were forced to retreat, delay, and reassess their operations, giving American forces strategic breathing room in the Ardennes. The ridge, snow-dusted and quiet once more, bore the subtle scars of battle. Trees were splintered, footprints marked the paths of advance and retreat, and spent-in block clips littered the frozen ground. For the platoon, it was a quiet triumph, a lesson in discipline, firepower, and perception. The Germans had believed they faced an entire company. In truth, they had confronted 30 determined Americans with semi-automatic rifles and nerves of steel. By nightfall, reports reached higher command. The engagement would be studied in after-action reports, not for the casualty count, but for the extraordinary effectiveness of a small force operating with superior weapons, terrain awareness, and psychological control. The lessons of the Ridge would echo in subsequent encounters across the European theater, shaping tactics, training, and doctrine. And as the forest settled into an icy silence, it was clear, in warfare, perception could be as lethal as bullets. 30 men, armed with precision and courage, had altered the battlefield. The story of a platoon that seemed like a company would soon be recounted in reports, letters, and oral histories, a testament to the lethal combination of innovation, discipline, and the human element. The ridge lay quiet after the engagement, but the echoes of battle lingered in the snow and the minds of those involved. For the Americans, the physical toll was light. Minor injuries were reported: frostbite, bruises from falls, and a few close calls from errant rifle fire, but remarkably, no fatalities. The platoon had achieved what larger units often struggled to accomplish, neutralizing an enemy company while remaining largely unscathed. Casualty reports from the German side painted a different picture. Roughly a dozen soldiers were confirmed killed, with several more wounded during the assault and failed flanking attempts. However, the most significant impact was not numerical. Confusion and fear had disrupted the enemy's command structure, delayed their advance, and forced them to abandon the ridge entirely. Officers later recorded that their platoon-sized engagement had been misinterpreted as a company-level force. Intelligence had failed to account for American tactics and the Garand's rapid-fire capability. The psychological victory was profound. Soldiers from the 99th Infantry Division reported an unusual calm in the aftermath. Letters home described the quiet satisfaction of holding a strategic position against overwhelming odds, or at least odds that appeared overwhelming to the enemy. Lieutenant Callahan wrote in his field diary, 30 men can hold a ridge, but only if they trust each other, trust their rifles, and maintain discipline. Today we proved it. This small engagement reinforced lessons learned over months of preparation. American infantry training emphasized not just marksmanship but coordination, timing, and control of terrain. Every soldier understood his role in creating both actual firepower and the illusion of greater strength. The M1 Garand was critical, but the human factor, discipline, patience, and nerve turned semi-automatic capability into tactical domination. On the German side, the immediate aftermath was marked by confusion and reassessment. Officers had to report to higher command that a supposed company engagement had been conducted by a mere platoon. The discrepancy between perceived and actual strength undermined confidence in reconnaissance, delayed subsequent operations, and forced commanders to allocate reinforcements to areas previously considered secure. Reports emphasized the difficulty of estimating enemy numbers in forested terrain. Against highly disciplined semi-automatic fire, strategically, the engagement became a small but significant victory in the Ardennes campaign. While not decisive, in itself it bought time, secured critical terrain, and demonstrated the effectiveness of small unit tactics. Platoon-level dominance became a blueprint for similar defensive and offensive operations, influencing planning for larger operations that would follow in early 1945. Beyond immediate military consequences, the engagement had a human dimension. that shaped soldiers' perspectives. American troops reported increased confidence in both their leadership and their rifles. German soldiers recounted fear and hesitation in letters and post-war memoirs, describing a sense of being everywhere at once when confronting the American platoon. This duality of confidence and fear illustrated the broader impact of superior attack firepower combined with terrain mastery and psychological manipulation. By evening, the ridge was quiet again. Snow, trodden and marked by footprints, reflected the pale light of a winter sun. American soldiers checked weapons, tended minor injuries, and wrote reports that would feed into high-level intelligence. German troops regrouped farther down the forest track, shaken but still operational. The balance of the battlefield had shifted subtly yet profoundly, demonstrating that success did not always require large numbers, tanks, or artillery. Precision, discipline, and perception could be just as lethal. The stage was set for broader implications. Reports from this engagement would influence command decisions, tactical planning, and even training protocols in the months to come. Small units with semi-automatic rifles could shape larger operational outcomes, alter enemy perceptions, and redefine how infantry engagements were fought in the European theater. The lessons of the ridge discipline, coordination, and the psychological weight of firepower would resonate beyond this single battle, setting the stage for further study and reflection. American forces had proven that technology, human skill, and strategic awareness could magnify a platoon's effect far beyond its numbers, an insight that would shape future encounters in the Ardennes and beyond. In the days following the ridge engagement, the consequences of the American platoon's actions rippled far beyond the immediate battlefield. The German command analyzed the encounter with growing concern. Reconnaissance reports confirmed that what had appeared to be a company-sized defense had, in reality, been a single platoon. Such misjudgments, repeated across smaller skirmishes, forced German commanders to reconsider advances through forested and constricted terrain. They began to allocate additional troops to secure positions that, in reality, required far fewer. Operational tempos slowed, and the efficiency of their formation suffered. American higher command took note as well. Reports highlighted the tactical advantage conferred by disciplined fire and the semi-automatic M1 Garand. Platoons armed with these rifles could delay, disrupt, or even repel larger enemy formations with minimal casualties. Training manuals emphasized the importance of synchronized fire, staggered positioning, and use of terrain to amplify perceived strength. The encounter demonstrated a fundamental principle: small, well-equipped units could have disproportionate effects on the battlefield as German forces quickly attempted to adapt. Patrols were trained to better recognize platoon-sized units operating with concentrated firepower. Flanking maneuvers became more cautious, and officers were instructed to verify enemy strength before committing company-level attacks. Yet, adaptation was slow, especially under the stress of winter combat in the Ardennes. Fear of unseen fire, compounded by the success of American platoons in multiple skirmishes, maintained a psychological edge for U.S. forces. The strategic significance of these engagements extended beyond single encounters. In the Ardennes, controlling key ridges, road junctions, and forest passes often determined whether advances succeeded or stalled. American platoons, armed with Garands, could seize and hold critical terrain, buying time for reinforcements or supporting larger operations. German units, overestimating American strength, were forced into defensive postures or delays that compromised operational objectives. In effect, the M1 Garand multiplied both firepower and influence, turning a platoon into a force capable of shaping an entire sector of the front. Contemporary reports from the 99th Infantry Division stressed the dual impact. Psychological and tactical. Soldiers described how German hesitation amplified the effectiveness of American fire, creating openings that did not exist on paper. Commanders noted that even minor skirmishes now had the potential to influence larger operations. The combination of technology, training, and terrain had become a force multiplier of unprecedented significance for the U.S. Army. Beyond immediate military outcomes, the ridge engagement influenced doctrine and morale across the theater. Platoon leaders were encouraged to emulate Callahan's methods, positioning riflemen for overlapping fields of fire, timing volleys to maintain the illusion of mass, and exploiting terrain to enhance psychological impact. Soldiers began to internalize a new understanding of their role. A single well-trained platoon could dictate the tempo of battle, challenge larger formations, and control perceptions as effectively as superior numbers might. For the Germans, lessons were slower to translate into practice. Fear of unseen fire persisted, and units were increasingly cautious when advancing into wooded or constricted terrain. Reconnaissance became more meticulous, but the advantage of surprise was often lost. Reports from multiple engagements described similar patterns: hesitation, overestimation of enemy numbers, and disruption of carefully planned advances. The Americans had not merely won a tactical engagement, they had forced the enemy to adapt in real time under duress. By February 1945, the cumulative effects of these platoon-level encounters had a measurable impact on operational planning. Intelligence reports, after-action reviews, and personal accounts emphasized that semi-automatic rifles like the M1 Garand, when combined with disciplined tactics, could redefine infantry combat. A single platoon could delay enemy companies, control strategic terrain, and influence outcomes well beyond their numerical size. In retrospect, the ridge in the Ardennes was a microcosm of a larger phenomenon. It highlighted how innovation, training, and human skill could amplify technology, how perception could be as lethal as bullets, and how small units, properly equipped and disciplined, could shape the battlefield. The Americans had demonstrated that superior coordination, combined with semi-automatic firepower, could convert 30 men into the illusion of an entire company, forever altering the way infantry warfare would be understood. The stage was now set for reflection: the broader historical significance, the human lessons, and the enduring impact of a rifle that, in the hands of disciplined soldiers, reshaped combat in ways that would echo long after the snow of the Ardennes had melted. The ridge in the Ardennes, frozen and silent once more, stands as a testament to more than just bullets and snow. It reflects the intersection of technology, discipline, and human ingenuity, a moment when 30 men, armed with semi-automatic rifles, became a force the enemy perceived as an entire company. The M1 Garand was revolutionary, but it was the hands that wielded it, the minds that coordinated, and the nerves that held steady under fire that turned innovation into impact in the broader sweep of history. This engagement illuminates a timeless truth: warfare is as much about perception as it is about numbers. A small, well-trained unit can shape outcomes far beyond its size. Psychological mastery, the ability to instill fear, hesitation, and misjudgment in the enemy, can be as decisive as overwhelming firepower or massed formations. In the Ardennes, the Americans did not merely fight. They controlled, manipulated, and outsmarted. The human element remained central. Soldiers operating the Garand were not merely instruments of war. They were disciplined artists of timing, positioning, and fire control. Their courage, cohesion, and trust in each other and their weapon allowed a platoon to rewrite the rules of engagement. For the Germans, the encounter became a lesson in caution and adaptation, an acknowledgement that technology and skill could reshape the battlefield in unforeseen ways. The legacy of the M1 Garand extends beyond one ridge, one platoon, or one battle. It symbolizes the fusion of innovation and human determination, illustrating how small units can wield disproportionate influence. In a war defined by massive armies and mechanized warfare, the rifle proved that ingenuity, precision, and perception could achieve results larger than the sum of men and weapons. As history reflects on these moments, the Ardennes Ridge reminds us that courage, discipline, and innovation often leave deeper marks than sheer numbers. In the frozen silence of the forest, 30 Americans proved that mastery of one simple instrument, a rifle, could project the power of many, and in doing so, they left a lesson that resonates far beyond the battlefield. The measure of strength is often not in size, but in the skill, determination, and vision with which it is applied.